Welcome to a new story made by Oracle One. The house at the end of the lane. The rain had been falling steadily for hours, a dark curtain of water that turned the streets of Ashgrove into glassy mirrors reflecting fractured neon signs and the rare, flickering streetlight. The air smelled of wet earth and decaying leaves, and the evening fog hung thickly, swallowing whole what little light dared to pierce through. For most, this kind of night was better spent indoors, but for Bethany Moore, it was the perfect night to chase a new mystery. Bethany was a real estate agent, but not just any agent. She'd carved a niche for herself by taking on homes no one wanted to touch, dilapidated, forgotten structures that wore their neglect like a badge of honor. Her knack for finding hidden gems where others saw hopeless ruins was what set her apart. So when a small-time developer had mentioned an abandoned property at the end of the lane, she'd been immediately intrigued. The house was curiously absent from all city records. There was no deed of ownership, no mortgage or tax information. The developer had stumbled upon it during a city survey, and it was not on any maps or registries. Rumors swirled that the house had been vacant for decades. Its owner vanished without a trace. The local lore said it was cursed, a place people avoided because odd noises and flickering lights were reported at night. Now, Bethany found herself parked under a skeletal tree marking the entrance to Dunwich Lane, a narrow, gravel road that twisted uncomfortably before dead-ending at the property. The house stood there, solitary, beneath the halo of a flickering street lamp broken halfway off its pole. Its silhouette was daunting, tall, narrow, with peeling blackened paint and shuttered windows that seemed like dark, lifeless eyes hounding her every move. Bethany tightened her jacket, clutching the keys the developer had given her. They didn't even fit perfectly, but one eventually turned, releasing the old, rusted bolt with an inglorious creak that echoed down the empty street. The moment she stepped inside, the thick air wrapped her like a damp shroud, heavy with mold and the sharp scent of rotting wood. Her flashlight's narrow beam cut through the dense gloom to reveal a long, narrow hallway lined with faded wallpaper, half torn and stained. Every footstep stirred up a cloud of dust motes, dancing in the stale air. Despite the house's state, it was clear it had once been something grand. Ornate wooden banisters led upstairs, their carvings nearly erased by time, and an old chandelier dangled precariously from the ceiling, its crystals dull and coated with grime. Bethany's pulse quickened. This was the kind of place with secrets buried beneath decades of neglect. Exploring room by room, she found remnants of a life left abruptly behind, cracked porcelain dolls in a shattered display cabinet, yellowed newspapers from the 1960s, a broken music box with its tiny ballerina forever frozen in a dusty twirl. But what seized her attention was the wall at the end of the hallway, where a series of old framed photographs hung, their glass cracked and frames warped. Bethany approached cautiously, noticing the faces of a family, parents, a little girl, even a teenage boy. All frozen in time, smiles faded like ghosts in the shadows. She reached out, wiping the glass with a trembling hand. Then her breath caught one of the photos, clearly the girl standing beside her mother on a worn-out porch, had a name scrawled in ink on the back, a name that made the blood drain from Bethany's face. Bethany Moore, her own name. She flipped the photo tremblingly and confirmed what she already suspected. The date inscribed was from 1963, a full 25 years before her birth. How could this be? The rational part of her mind clouded by the shock, but the pull was irresistible. She slid the photo out of the frame carefully and studied it for minutes, turning it over and over. The little girl's wide eyes stared back at her. They were unmistakably hers. The same oval face, the same tangled brown curls. Her pulse thundered in her ears as she hurried to pick up another framed picture, setting it side by side. Another small detail struck her. Each photograph bore dates with writers' names, all with the surname Moore. Other photos showed her in various stages growing up, as if the house had been the stage of her entire childhood. But she'd never been here. She barely remembered her early years, coming from a foster home at age 5. Suddenly the floorboards groaned behind her, breaking the stunned silence. Bethany whipped her head around, but there was nothing. The house was still. Too still. She reached for her phone to call the developer, but it died instantly. No signal. The walls seemed to press closer, the shadows thickening with something malevolent. She was not alone. Heart-hammering, Bethany forced herself to move. She knew she had to explore the upstairs. The banister creaked beneath her weight as she ascended, the air growing colder with each step, her breath now visible in the icy stillness. At the end of the hallway stood a closed door with an old brass doorknob. With hands shaking, she turned it open. Inside was a nursery frozen in time. Wallpaper decorated with faded pink roses peeled from the walls. A crib stood in one corner, draped in dusty lace. And on the wall, hung a yellowed birth certificate in a cracked frame. Bethany's hands trembled as she read it. Bethany Elise Moore, born March 3, 1958. But there was another name, scrawled beneath it, barely legible. Adopted by James and Mary Moore. Her own adoptive parents, she realized, dated years later. She turned quickly, disoriented, and her gaze locked on a small wooden box sitting on a neighboring shelf. Carved with intricate symbols, it beckoned to her. She opened it slowly, revealing a diary, its pages brittle but intact. She flipped it open. The first page read, "Remember who you are. The house does not forget, even if we have tried to." Her breath caught as she read on. The diary was written in a child's small, neat handwriting. It was dated from the early 1960s. The entries were chilling, describing toys moving on their own, whispers in the walls, shadows that followed her everywhere. She wrote about feeling trapped, being watched, and the house speaking to her in dreams. One entry stopped Bethany cold. "Mama says I'm not real. That I'm just a ghost. But I know I'm here. Bethany is here. I am here." The last entry was smeared with ink as if the child was crying or desperate. Bethany dropped the book and staggered back just as the door slammed shut behind her. Panic surged. She yanked the door handle but it wouldn't budge. Then, from the dark corner of the room, came a soft, eerie giggle, the unmistakable sound of a child's laughter. The air grew thick and suffocating. Shadows writhed into twisted shapes, forming pale faces that leered from the walls. The temperature plummeted until ice crystals formed on the glass of the window. Bethany pressed herself against the door, heartbeat racing like thunder. "I'm here," a voice whispered, echoing from every corner. "I'm Bethany. I'm not real. I'm real." The nursery twisted and pulsed, the past and present colliding into one terrible moment. In a burst of desperate strength, Bethany slammed her shoulder into the door. It gave way with a crash, and she tumbled into the hallway, gasping for air. Heart pounding, she raced downstairs, grabbing the keys as she went, desperate to escape the labyrinthine prison. Outside, the rain had stopped. The fog was lifting, but as she glanced back once more, the house's windows seemed to watch her, the frames alive with unblinking eyes. She drove off with shaking hands. The image of the nursery and that diary burned into her mind. That night, Bethany scoured every archive and registry again, desperate to find any record of the house or the strange family. No records existed. No family named Moore had ever lived there. It was as if the house had simply swallowed them whole. When she returned home, she found a package on her doorstep. Inside was an envelope with her name, in handwriting she didn't recognize. Inside the envelope was the same diary she'd found upstairs. But added, in a fresh scrawl at the back, was a note. Some houses never forget. Neither do we. You were always ours. Come back. Bethany's phone buzzed with a message. She stared down at the screen. It was a picture, taken from inside her apartment. A picture of her, asleep in bed. Behind her stood a faint, translucent girl with tangled curls. And in the little girl's hand was the old wooden box. She was never alone. Like and subscribe for more stories.